Hello, it's Ruby, and today we are going to be talking classics. That hugely significant and slightly arbitrary word, classics. Let's park the issues that come with labelling some literature just inherently better because it has been canonised and has been seen as great throughout time. There can be a misconception when it comes to classics that they are stuffy, that they are boring, that they are not as exciting as books that are being published today, and that these books just aren't going to grip us in the same way. And this video is here to completely lambast that, because I'm going to be talking through some of the most unhinged classics I've ever come across. Some of these are just so bizarre and wonderful because they are so bizarre. And I'm being kind of loose in how I use the word classics because I'm going more for like older literature. Classics can feel quite daunting, and I think a lot of that is just the narrative that surrounds them. Like, we think about classics, we almost anticipate that they will be boring or not as gripping. Like, I definitely used to have that assumption around classic literature. And I mean, don't get me wrong, there are some classic books or like older books which can read as a little bit dull. Like E.M. Forster, for example. If E.M. Forster was your first introduction to classic literature, then you might be quite justified in thinking that all classic literature is a little bit stuffy. And each to their own. Some people I know will really love Forster, and please do contradict me in the comments and tell me why Forster is great, but I've never been able to get on with Forster. I find his writing overly superfluous. I don't find his plots hugely engaging. I don't particularly like his characters or think that they're like hugely complex. Like, there are moments in his books which are great, but they don't satisfy me as a reader. However, the characters in these books are so real, like they read as incredibly real. I love a good morally grey, morally ambiguous character, and these characters in these books are, I think, very layered and hugely complex, and they do feel real. So without further ado, I hope that you can walk away from this video with a few more books for your TBR, which I'm sure is already incredibly long, and so I also am sorry that I'm giving more recommendations, but also I can only be half blamed because you have clicked on this video, and so continue watching at your own discretion, because honestly these books are incredible, and when you hear about them, if you haven't already read them, you are going to want to read them. So let's start with a book that I have talked about before. I've used the words unhinged, I've used the words morally ambiguous, and this author does encapsulate all of that, which is Dostoevsky, who is one of my favourites, and in particular there are two books that I wanted to recommend. The first is Crime and Punishment. Now I've read a few novels by Dostoevsky. I think I've read 4 or 5 by him. He's excellent, just such real characters. So if you are a deep thinker, Dostoevsky is definitely a good author for you. Crime and Punishment, I think, is the book to read if you want to overcome any assumptions that classics are stuffy, because it's the furthest thing from. Crime and Punishment is about a murderer, a man who murders this old woman who is like, she's a debt collector, so she lends people money and then she holds them to that loan, and everyone owes her money and nobody really likes her at all. Like, the old woman isn't a very nice character, so the protagonist, the narrator of this book, takes it upon himself to murder this woman, and he does it very soon in the novel as well, and he plans it all out, and he's so logical in the way that he plans it. Like, he's talking through it and he makes it sound like the most logical, like reasonable thing for him to be doing, as if he's just going out and, you know, buying food from Tesco. It's so kind of chillingly practical and pragmatic. And then he murders this woman, and he doesn't expect himself to feel any remorse, any guilt, and then suddenly it hits him, and it's not so much guilt actually as just complete mental turmoil. He's overcome with what he's done, but he's also overcome with the fear of being found out for what he's done. And the book is predominantly him after committing the murder, filled with so many psychological like twists and turns as his mental state goes in and out of guilt, in and out of fear and anxiety, and just heightens. And it's such a chilling, like haunting and intense book. And if you like reading psychological contemporary books like Before I Go to Sleep, then Crime and Punishment is a book you have to read. It's also just so fast paced. Like, I promise you, it's it's a big book, like it is a big book. I've got my copy. This is my copy, and the one that I read, and it is long, like it's not a short book, but it goes so quickly. Like, I did not want to finish this book, and I wish I could go back and read it for the first time again, and I definitely will be rereading this. So number one book I would be recommending is this. And then the second book is also Dostoevsky, which is Notes from Underground, and I can't choose a favourite. I like each of the things I've read by him for different reasons, but Notes from Underground is much shorter. It's only about this long. I've been looking for my copy for the last 10 minutes and I can't find it, so that's very sad. I can't believe I haven't got it on my bookshelf with my favourites. But it's much more stream of consciousness. Like, think early 20th century, people like Virginia Woolf, where you've got long streams of consciousness which are just being thought out loud. This is what Notes from Underground is like. Also reminds me a bit of Sartre's Nausea, of Camus' The Outsider, but that very philosophical, very introspective sort of writing. And there isn't a plot as such. It's more reflections from the underground man on being underground. And the narrator is very much, like we would say now, disassociated and absent from everything that's happening in his real life. Like, he's living underground. He's, you know, the world is occurring and events are occurring above ground, and then he's underneath, and he's separated. And it's deeply sad, but it's also I think it's very universally human. The pleasure of despair, but then it is in despair that we find the most acute pleasure, especially when we are aware of the hopelessness of the situation. Everything is a mess, in which it is impossible to tell what's what, but that despite this impossibility and deception, it still hurts you, and the less you can understand, the more it hurts. Okay, next we've got this, which is also one of the most beautiful books in my collection. This is Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe. And this edition has these absolutely stunning woodcuts. It's the 1993 Folio Society edition. This book is perfect for people who loved, like, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, Macbeth. It's fantastic. It's written like a play, but I don't think it's really conducive to being performed, and I'd love to see it performed, but I think, like with John Milton's Samson Agonistes, it's not really anticipating being performed. But this is about a scholar called Dr. Faustus, and he is the absolute top of his game. Like, he's such a respected academic, and he is bored. He's very bored, and so he makes a deal with the devil that he can have 24 years of access to this higher kind of knowledge. Like, he feels like he's exhausted all of the earthly knowledge which there is to find, and so he is seeking out a different kind of knowledge on a different plane, kind of this like capitalized magic, and he has these 24 years, and instead of using this magic for anything like good, he's very, like, I don't know, he's not a great character. He uses this power that he's been given more for like petty tricks and games, and again, like, talking about morally ambiguous, very human characters, feels very human, and it's a story about evil, about accountability. It's filled with this dark magic, and if you like fantasy, if you like magical realism too, fantastic one to read. Next thing is very different, but again, psychological, interesting, and definitely a classic. I'm not going to say definitely, but like, I'd be very surprised if you didn't enjoy this. My favourite short story ever of all time is Bartleby the Scrivener by Herman Melville. It was first published in 1853 in Putman's magazine, and it's set in a New York office on Wall Street, and Bartleby, this man called Bartleby, comes into this I think it's like a finance office, I don't actually know, but he goes into this new office and he is a scrivener, so he's there writing things down. That's meant to be his job, and at first there isn't much of a problem, but Bartleby basically has this habit. Any single time that anyone asks him to do something, he just says, I would prefer not to. That's all he says. He doesn't say no, and because he doesn't say no, nobody ever challenges him, so he just says, oh, I would prefer not to, and nobody says to him, like, the boss, it's narrated by the boss, and he doesn't know what to say. He's like, oh, okay then, because it's not like he's definitively saying like no to anything, and so he doesn't have any grounds on which to fire him. It's kind of like when people are mean to each other, but in a very undercurrent way. Like, you know, if somebody says something which you know is meant in a nasty way, but you can't like pull them up on it because it's not clearly in a mean way, and so you feel like you don't have the grounds to say, oh, that hurt my feelings, because there's such an easy defense from the other party. Like, they can easily just say, oh, but I didn't mean it like that, I just said this, I never said anything like that. And I feel that's very similar to what is happening in Bartleby the Scrivener. The story is just very bizarre, it's very odd, it's also not very long, it's about 50 pages, and it's often treated as a critique and insight into capitalist work spaces, alienation within work, and so it's also really interesting to see this being written in the 1850s, when capitalism was really in its early days as opposed to today. Next, oh my gosh, we've got one of the best books ever written. So, well, all of these books are wonderful, but I actually just don't know where I'm putting all my books at the moment. Of course, I am talking about the one and only Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Now, you could read anything by Daphne du Maurier and it would be great, it would be brilliant, it would be worth reading, but Rebecca is her most famous, and I would say my favourite. Like, for a while I was like, oh, is Jamaica Inn my favourite, because I do love Jamaica Inn, but then I realised I was probably just saying that because it wasn't her most popular book, and really, like, I think this is her most popular book for a reason. Rebecca is the classic to start with. Like, if you are feeling a bit daunted by classics and you know you want to read them but you're not really sure where to start, this is the one to start with, because it could have been written yesterday. The writing is so lucid, so vibrant, it's fast-paced but also has moments of slowness and reflection, and the descriptions of the large country house Manderley where it's set are so vivid, haunting, gothic. It's fabulous. So Rebecca is the story of this young woman who is travelling in Europe, and she meets and falls in love with this man called Mr. De Winter. Mr. De Winter is a very wealthy man who owns Manderley, which is this country house in England, and his late wife Rebecca recently died. So anyway, they end up falling in love and they honeymoon and everything is glorious and wonderful and idyllic, and then they return to Manderley and everything changes, and there are secrets everywhere and ghosts haunting every single corridor that they go down. And Mrs. De Winter, the new Mrs. De Winter, she just feels uneasy. Like, there's an uncanniness to the whole of this house, and especially like the ghost of Rebecca. Like, she can feel Rebecca everywhere. She can feel her husband's late wife everywhere, and she grows jealous. Like, she grows incredibly jealous of this woman Rebecca, and it's such an honest and like, oh, I don't know, like chilling, intense exploration of jealousy, and what jealousy drives you to, but also it's all kind of within her head. Like, it's not really like she's doing anything, it's more about how this all plays out in her head, and so it is deeply psychological, but it's so good, honestly. Like, I reread this year, it's so good. Like, please read this. Just because, like, if you haven't, like, you have to read this book. It's one of those books that everyone has to read. Next, we have got something which is a lot older. This is Sophocles' The Theban Plays, which there are 3 in here, but Antigone, the third in the sequence, is my favourite Greek play. And it's such a tragic, with a capital T. Of course, it's a tragedy. It's so tragic, and makes me cry. There are lines in this play that just will make you cry, and that you will remember. Like, I've memorized lines from this play because it's just so moving. So Antigone is a young woman whose brother has recently been killed, and she really wants to bury her brother. She wants for him to have a good burial, but the state is saying that he can't be buried properly because of how he died. And a large part of this play is how Antigone navigates like her grief for her brother, but how she shows such strength. There's this one line where she says, "I could remarry or have another child, but who can grow me a new brother?" Oh my gosh, that line, who can grow me a new brother? If you have siblings, then this will be very moving. So it's very short as well. It's a play, it's not long at all, but it's one of those things that you will remember forever if you read. What should we go for next? I feel like I have to talk about Hoffman. Like, you can't do a video about psychological books, which are terrifying and uncanny and haunting, and then not include E.T.A. Hoffman. So E.T.A. Hoffman, of course, wrote The Nutcracker, but The Nutcracker is, I mean, like, there's a tiny bit of absurdity to it, but not really. The one that is just so unhinged is The Sandman. Of course you will know the myth, I'm assuming you'll know the story, but it was when I read it, like I read it a couple years ago, and it's terrifying, and the prospect of this story being read to children is also like even more terrifying. It's basically about the lingering childhood trauma of the protagonist, who was told this story of the Sandman when he was young, and the Sandman is a figure who comes and steals the eyes of children, and he becomes obsessed with this man who lives next door to him, who makes automatons and is making these like kind of robot-like figures like in Hugo, and he watches them from his window, and as he watches them he's reminded of these stories that he was told as a child. It's a very haunting story, not very long again, but excellent. Very, very good. The next book is a story of obsession. We love a good book about obsession. And so I am going to recommend Death in Venice by Thomas Mann, which is the story of obsession, I think. It's about this man who visits Venice. He's in Venice and he becomes obsessed with this young boy who he keeps on seeing on the beach. He's staying in the same hotel as him with his mother and siblings, and the narrator thinks of this boy as being like a paradigm of beauty, perfection. Like, he kind of observes this child like a piece of art, and he becomes obsessed with like seeing this child every day. And it is just possibly the most memorable description, kind of exploration of obsession that I've read about. I've read it twice and I intend to read it again. I did want to talk about, briefly at least, On Murder as Considered One of the Fine Arts by De Quincey, because if you want something satirical, if you like Monty Python for example, On Murder is Considered One of the Fine Arts is a must read, and they've got this in one of the tiny penguin black classics. That's the one I read. This is an essay by this fictional character from the Murder Club, and it's basically this group of people who meet every week to discuss murder as considered one of the fine arts. So they talk about murder artistically and what the best way to murder would be, how it is an aesthetic thing, kind of fitting in with theories of aestheticism which was starting to arise in England and Paris at the time. And it's so removed from the actual act of murder and like what happens when you murder, instead about like the symbolism behind it, like the stylistic elements of it. And I just haven't read anything like it before. It's very dark, but it's also cutting and interesting psychologically, and the furthest thing from stuffy as you can imagine. Before I talk about the next book, I just wanted to jump in because as I'm editing that this book feels very out of place. I really wanted to include it because I'm talking about human books where the characters feel real, where the characters feel very human. And this is not fiction, it's not a novel, it's not unhinged in the way that the other books are. And yet I still really want to put this video in here because my hope is that somebody will watch this, someone will be watching this video with the hopes of reading books with very complex, very human characters, and that they might walk away and decide to read this because it is a fantastic book. But I just wanted to jump in and say that before I talk because it feels very, very insensitive otherwise. I didn't realise how insensitive it felt until I was editing and it just felt very jarring. So sorry, disclaimer done, but I'm going to get back into it. Next, I've put down Journals of Sylvia Plath. Sylvia Plath is one of the greatest writers. Of course, she wrote The Bell Jar, which I haven't included on this list, but please read The Bell Jar. I wanted to talk about the journals instead of The Bell Jar now because I still think they're kind of well known, but like they're not as well known as The Bell Jar. I've read everything that Sylvia Plath has written. Like I read all of her poems, all of her letters, The Bell Jar and her journals, and of everything I've read by her, her journals are my favourite because they're so raw, they're so honest, and obviously it's incredibly intimate and quite like invasive to be reading somebody's journals. I think the fact of that is also very clear to us when reading at the end, because the last 2 years, I think it's 2 years, of journal entries were disposed of and burnt by her husband Ted Hughes. There are just so many striking lines of poetry in this which encapsulate her experience. She had postnatal depression. She before that had experienced depression for a long time, and she even had electroshock therapy, which of course was kind of a mode of treatment in the 1950s, which was deemed appropriate. Awful. This copy is so heavily annotated. I've read it 2 times and I'm well in need of a reread. If you're looking for something very human, then these journals are necessary to read. Reality is what I make it. That is what I have said I believed. Then I look at the hell I am wallowing in, nerves paralysed, action nullified, fear, envy, hate, all the corrosive emotions of insecurity biting away at my sensitive guts, time, experience, the colossal wave sweeping tidal over me, drowning. How can I ever find that permanence, that continuity with past and future, that communication with other human beings that I crave? Can I ever honestly accept an artificial imposed solution? How can I justify? How can I rationalise the rest of my life away? If you do want something sad and complex, and you want something older by a female writer, I would also recommend The Sydney Psalter by Mary Sidney Herbert. I won't go into huge amounts of depth with this, but they're translations of the Psalms from Latin into English, and Mary Sidney Herbert did them with her brother, Philip Sidney, until he died, and then she translated the rest. But there is such sorrow in some of these Psalms, not all of them, but they're my personal favourite translations of the Psalms, and especially if you're Christian and you're familiar with the Psalms, you might enjoy reading these and then also be able to read one of the classic early modern female writers, because early modern female writers are not hugely read and discussed, and so it's a great thing to be reading. And then the final book I will talk about is Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy. I wasn't sure whether I would put this one on the list actually. It's my favourite of the Hardy novels. Jude the Obscure is definitely my favourite. It's about this young man who is illiterate and he lives very close to Oxford. Well, it's not called Oxford, it's called Christminster, but it's meant to be Oxford. And so he teaches himself Latin because you can't go to Oxford at this time without reading Latin. And everything he does, right from when he's a young boy, goes into this like pursuit of escaping from his job as a stonemason and becoming an academic, studying at Oxford. Everything goes into it, and yet at every step he is thwarted and he faces challenges, and it's just so tragic. Like, it's so sad because he wants it more than anything and he will do anything for it, but he's also such a good person, and so things get in the way that shouldn't have to get in the way, but they do. And there are just so many moments of like absolute like tragedy for this main character, but Hardy describes that loss and that sorrow so well, and it's a must-read book. Like, it's excellent. It's really, really good. So I'm editing, and as I'm editing, I'm thinking, how on earth did I leave off one of the greatest classics that I possibly could have put on this list? The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. We're talking about psychological books, which are slightly unhinged, and then also books which explore the human psyche, which are psychological, which are very complex and human. And I didn't talk about The Yellow Wallpaper, which feels kind of criminal actually. The Yellow Wallpaper is another short story. So basically this woman and her husband moved to this house in the countryside, and she's been sent there because she has, which is this blanket term that women were diagnosed with in the late Victorian period. It's kind of a catch-all diagnosis, but treatment for it was also like awful. And this story explores one aspect of that treatment, which is that women should be given lots of fresh air, which is why she's in the countryside, though she's also locked in an attic, so she does not get much fresh air at all. And there were also warnings around them using their brain too much and reading and writing. But this story is narrated by the woman who is writing these journal entries. So she is disobeying her husband, who is a physician, as she tells us this story. But she starts to see these figures emerging from the wallpaper. There is this lurid, awful, florid yellow wallpaper which coats the walls of this attic room, and she has to stare at it every single day, the whole way through the day, because she's just locked in here. And she imagines that she can see these figures moving like this person in the wallpaper, and it's brilliant. Like, it's fantastic. I hope that you go away and read it. yes, anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. This was quite an impromptu video. I was thinking about it this afternoon. I was like, oh, I actually just want to sit down and talk about these books. So I hope that you managed to walk away with something to add to your TBR list. And let me know if you do read any of them. Let me know if you've read any of these, what you think about them. And I hope that you have more than just a productive week.